We know our planet inside and out. At least that's what we think. After all, we monitor the Earth and its weather patterns from outer space. We measure the Earth's surface and peer into her deepest depths. In today's world of optimal hardware and intelligent software, mankind is reverting to the status of hunter and gatherers. Researchers from all over the world are compiling a vast and very valuable resource, data about our planet Earth. This data affords a new glimpse of our planet. The ongoing exploration of the world has entered the era of big data. But this development also harbors some big problems. No matter where we are at any given moment, they enable us to navigate the world safely. Data about our environment tells us how choppy the sea is and what kind of weather we can expect. Ever since we began creating digital representations of ourselves and our surroundings, we have enjoyed an illusion of safety. After all, the data is precise and can be calculated and analyzed. But still, some phenomena remain unpredictable. These tourists are witnessing a phantom of the seas, a monster wave. Worldwide, on average 2 ships per week are lost to these oversized swells. Few people have ever seen one, but what if we could monitor the entire ocean around the clock? An ambitious goal, but not an impossible one. In April 2014, a satellite was launched that ushered in a new era of planetary monitoring. In the coming years, the so-called Sentinel mission will collect data about the oceans, climate, and atmosphere, then transmit the data 3 times faster than any of its predecessor satellites. The Sentinel mission will beam back 12 billion images to the planet Earth. The geosciences stand to benefit immensely from this unimaginable quantity of data, provided they are able to make sense of it. It's a fantastic voyage to a world we are only beginning to understand. Science is discovering the digital world and creating an entirely new research discipline, scientific data mining.
Every day, scientists learn more about the Earth. What's novel is actually this data deluge that is pouring in on us. So we have the sheer volume, we have the velocity, we have the variety, and we have aspects of veracity. So actually, we have a big data challenge today to cope with all of that.
As the mountain of data grows, so does hope that we can get the oceans under control. For many years, all it took was the trained eye of a seasoned sailor and a lifeboat. In the past 150 years, Coast Guard personnel have saved more than 80,000 lives. But even they sometimes succumb to the waves. During a mission in the North Sea in 1995, the Coast Guard ship Alfred Krupp found itself in the grip of a monster wave that swept 2 people overboard. Researchers have been gathering data on monster waves ever since this incident. They are collecting information about a phenomenon that was previously virtually unknown. Mathematicians, physicists, and wave researchers are collaborating to figure out what gives rise to these waves. They see a correlation between what happened to the Alfred Krupp and a second incident. That same night, the measuring station on an oil platform registered an enormous wave, only 570 kilometers away. 2 monster wave incidents on a single night, both within the confines of the relatively small North Sea. This cannot be a coincidence. For the first time, it had been incontrovertibly demonstrated that monster waves exist. But where do they come from? You can't observe the phenomenon of monster waves from the shore. They seem to come suddenly from nowhere in the middle of the sea. The waves themselves are also not visible from outer space. But there are 2 things our satellites can observe. Optical recordings show cloud formations, and radar records reveal wind movements. Researchers compare these 2 types of recordings and recognize the same structure in each, a ring of clouds. They call this formation an open cell. Open cells are formed when cold air falls to the surface of the North Sea, displacing warmer air to higher altitudes. The cold air becomes a squall that moves over the sea's surface. If it's the same speed as the water, it transfers a steady stream of energy to the ocean's wave, causing it to swell.
Es war eigentlich zum ersten Mal, dass man auf
It was the first time that it was possible to see both types of satellite image, radar and optical, at the same time. That led us to the explanation that it was these rings, these cell structures, that had in fact led to such high wind speeds on the surface of the water, which ultimately caused this kind of swell or wave.
verursachen können.
That also means that monster waves could conceivably form just about anywhere. Is there then no way to protect ships from them? To find out how boats are protected and able to withstand a stormy sea requires more than a few calculations and theoretical examinations of physical materials. There's only one way: by putting ships in the water. Although a scale model can also do the trick. In the wave tunnel at Hamburg Shipbuilding Research Institute, engineers are simulating rough seas. They can make waves at the push of a button, then measure the boat's reactions. Is the ship built well enough to stand up against high waves, or should its design be modified? When ships are pushed to their limits, a number of factors determine whether they will survive. If the captain's bridge is located up front at the bow, the wave hits the most sensitive part of the ship. Future shipbuilders can take that into consideration. But when can monster waves be expected? That's what the researchers want to find out. On the Pheno research platform, measuring equipment records comprehensive data about a giant wave. It's a fortunate coincidence, as it enables the researchers to map the phenomenon on a computer. If the water is being whipped up by the squalls of an open cell, the scientists have to include the wind in their calculations. Susanna Lehner and her team have augmented a conventional wave model with data about the wind speed of squalls. And sure enough, the simulation corresponds exactly to the wave recorded by the measuring equipment. Theoretically, computers should be capable of predicting monster waves. But in the real world, this is not yet possible. It would require constant satellite surveillance, and that kind of bandwidth simply doesn't exist. So we still have to be on the lookout for monster waves. But computer scientist Peter Baumann is certain that in the future, scientists will be able to obtain and analyze additional data and create strategies to ensure safer seas. He has been commissioned by the European Union to find ways to deal with large amounts of data.
So the next step would be, based on more satellite data that we have on ocean observations, on more simulations, to actually do forecasts, to do predictions, so that ships can be warned ahead of such freak waves and can react accordingly. In order to achieve that, we need an even better observation of the oceans. Traditionally, Satellite imagery has focused on land. That was interesting in the first place. Now we also need to watch the oceans very closely. And it's also about large-scale simulations. So on ocean scale, like Northern Atlantic simulation, in order to obtain that. That means even more data and even more complex analysis have to be run in order to allow such forecasts.
But the more data we collect, the more difficult processing it becomes. Computers are capable of storing large amounts of data, but there are limits to the amount of data that can be transported. Today, if you want to move 10 terabytes of data, the internet won't do you much good. That much data practically has to be moved like you would a crate of bananas. Except the truck will be filled with hard drives instead of fruit. One of the central hubs for processing scientific data can be found right in the middle of Lisbon. The European Maritime Safety Agency, or EMSA, needs comprehensive data as soon as possible. The data comes from all over Europe, supplied by a huge network of researchers. This is the central node in an ambitious project called the Clean Sea Net that monitors European waters in near real time. The experts evaluate randomly selected satellite images of the seas, looking for conspicuous spots on the surface of the water. The office also handles several emergencies each year. A captain, a Coast Guard, or a concerned citizen calls to report a suspicious discovery on the high seas. Could it be that a ship has illegally discharged oil into the water?
Objects on the water are not static. They're all moving, always. Ships especially, but also oil slicks. And it's important for our member countries to be able to react quickly, for example, by recognizing potential polluters and apprehending them.
The collaborators in Clean Sea Net first have to determine which satellite is near the location in question. In this case, a ship has been sighted off the coast of England. Is there a satellite that can deliver images of the area within the next 15 minutes? The experts are lucky. A picture is available. It usually takes several days, but right now, the data is needed faster. So the satellite sends the data directly to the nearest station, where the image is processed and forwarded to Lisbon in short order. Olaf Trischmann and his team compare the satellite image with the maritime traffic reports. Every ship transmits a signal at regular intervals that can be used to identify the ship and its route. The oil slick off the coast of England can be connected to a specific ship. The polluter's identity is revealed.
I compare Clean Sea Net to speed checks on highways. Drivers know their speed may be measured using radar, and it's the same way with Clean Sea Net. Ships know that there's an agency that might be checking to see whether they have illegally discharged oil, so they're more careful. It leads to more safety and better behavior.
The deterrent actually seems to be working. The pollution rate on the seas has decreased considerably since Clean Sea Net was set up.
Good evening, EMSA speaking. Yes, we have identified an oil spill in your southwest.
30 minutes after the picture was taken, Trischmann informs the authorities. You can't get much faster than that. Computers can process large amounts of data, but can't replace the experienced eyes of the experts.
Evaluating large amounts of data naturally also requires a massive amount of data processing. First, the raw data from the satellite has to be turned into images, but of course there is also lots of analysis to be done. And that analysis is carried out by people at the moment, not by machines. We have observed that the algorithms currently available are not sufficient to ensure reliable identification of polluters.
We humans are at a disadvantage because we are not capable of working round the clock. and the faster the data comes in, the more difficult it becomes for us to process it. Even our computers are not equipped for the rate of speed at which the data is delivered. The result is a huge backlog of data, a mountain of information that is quite literally over the heads of today's scientists.
This big data, this data deluge that is coming in on us, actually poses new problems on us. So we have the data, but how can we analyze that? It is not just the sheer volume, it's also about the speed, how data come in. Now imagine you have a fire hose and you try to drink from that. Then you get a picture of what is our situation there. We cannot analyze data at the volume and speed they're coming in on us.
So, are we really only getting a small sip instead of a deluge? Is information being lost because data is being collected that can never be analyzed? The German satellite data archive near Munich contains vast amounts of valuable data collected over the past 30 years. The archive can store more than 50 petabytes of data on magnetic cassette tapes. It may be that these tapes hold the answers to questions that won't be posed until sometime in the future. But when that day comes, will we be able to access the data? The more data we save for later, the greater the risk of losing information forever. Even the best storage media can age and become obsolete. But maybe there's a way to master the deluge of archived images and virtual reality. Researchers are mining the satellite data archive, hoping to make its information more readily accessible. As if the archive were a library with open books lying before them, the scientists can pick out an image, dive into it as it were, and check to see whether it shows structures similar to those on other images. The computer works like an automatic sorting facility. It searches the images for components like vegetation, farmland, bridges, and water. The computer sorts the images into stacks and categorizes them by their content.
At the present, they probably store in archives more than 10 to 20 millions of satellite images acquired after the 80s. With a new era of the Sentinel satellites of the European Space Agency, the data volume per day will reach the level of 10 terabytes. This is our data rate. So we are going to reach soon thousands of petabytes of data, which is a large volume of data, and all the research community, it's putting huge efforts in dealing with information extraction.
Soon we will no longer be talking about millions or billions of images, but trillions. And then it will be more important than ever to uncover meaningful information hidden in the mountains of data. And satellites are not the only instruments that deliver data about our planet. In fact, researchers the world over are currently measuring and recording data in an effort to learn more about the Earth. The data they are collecting is recorded in many diverse formats and resolutions. Researchers plumbing the depths of the ocean use different standards and measurements than scientists studying the atmosphere, for example. But what if they could augment each other's findings with their own and discover details that are new to both disciplines? If they can find a way to combine data from diverse sources, we will have a more precise comprehension of the planet Earth. But it's no easy task. The more diverse the data sources, the more difficult it is for the computer to standardize the data. The different formats have to be compared with one another constantly. Unless it is done properly, the scientists receive a distorted view. But the promise of big data is precise results, and Peter Baumann has found a way to achieve that. He is looking for the needle in the huge haystack of data, and his Earth server technology helps him find it. It ensures that the database knows exactly which data a researcher needs and which to ignore. Basically, it works like a bookshelf. Data is generally stored in small packets, lined up on a shelf in an orderly fashion, so they're easy to find. When a researcher sends a request to the server, he doesn't have to browse through all the data on the shelf, but can go straight to the packet that's relevant to him. Actually, the scientist doesn't even notice how big the data mountain is, but receives a tailor-made result back from the server.
In the Earth Server project, we are establishing big Earth data analytics, that is, rapid ad hoc processing and filtering on massive geodata. To this end, we use a database approach. This may sound technical, but actually a database you're using all the time. You go to eBay and search, you talk to a database. You are going to Amazon and searching something, there is a database behind. Now, databases have been tremendously successful, but actually they do not support the technical, scientific data. And this is the gap we are closing, to offer these flexible, scalable database services on the multidimensional data that make up for the big geodata.
Faster access to data for everyone, from anywhere in the world. That also means making the data available to any individual who wants to access it. But just how much does this view of the world tell us about ourselves? Our globalized society is changing rapidly. It won't be long before the Earth is bursting at its seams. And the faster our megacities grow, the more difficult it is for us to keep up with all the changes. Can data about the planet help us get a handle on things? Is it possible to data map people's behavior? And should we even want to? In our collective consciousness, data collection has achieved an unfavorable reputation. People are deeply concerned about privacy issues. Will we still have any privacy when everything that happens on the planet is measured, recorded, and stored? Geodata can also include information about people, but this is not necessarily a bad thing. At the German Aerospace Center near Munich, Hannes Taubenberg is examining how the face of the world is changing. As a geographer, he evaluates satellite images to investigate how cities are changing, particularly in Asia. But can data collected by observing the planet from space help us comprehend where society is going?
Diese Daten geben erstmal
First of all, this data gives us information about the planet's surface, and we are concerned with extracting information from the data. So if I look at a satellite image, what I get is not information, but merely a visual impression. We are working to create formulas that can be used to extract quantitative information from the data.
Taubenberg has taught his computer to distinguish inhabited areas from uninhabited ones. The closer people live together, the more difficult it is to assess how many people actually live at a given location. But a bird's eye view includes one good indicator, namely roofs. Once the computer has recognized an element as a building's roof, it begins looking for similar structures. The computer counts how many roofs are visible. Now Taubenberg is using this formula to comprehend the growth of the city of Hong Kong. Back in 1975, Hong Kong was already a metropolis with a population of 4 million. The city has experienced enormous population growth since then, and it is expanding onto the mainland and becoming consolidated with other urban areas.
The most amazing finding is that megacities, urban regions with more than 10 million inhabitants, can no longer be seen as the largest urban conglomerates on the planet. Now we speak of mega regions, which are conglomerations of cities growing together, whose populations are no longer 10 or 20 million, but 100 million inhabitants.
A city with a population of 100 million. That's more inhabitants than the countries of France, Belgium, and the Netherlands combined. Data collection can also facilitate humanitarian assistance. Since the crisis in Syria began, the al-Satari refugee camp in Jordan has been growing bigger by the day. On the ground, it's virtually impossible to determine how many people live there and how fast the population is growing. But Elisabeth Schöpfer can take a close look at developments from her desk in Germany. She's trying to find out how many refugees have come to the camp using satellite images that reveal the shape of the camp.
By distinguishing between the various types of camp structures, we can better estimate and determine the number of inhabitants in the refugee camp. We assume that the numbers of people living in tents differs from that of those in large containers. And the more precisely we can distinguish between the categories, the better our overall population estimate will be.
All that can be seen with the unaided eye are spots. But Schöpfer can program the computer to recognize and distinguish between tents and containers and count them. The computer then scans the image for similar structures. Piece by piece, she is slowly able to decode the structure of the camp. Schöpfer repeats this analysis every few months. Her images reveal orderly rows of huts that were distributed by aid organizations, as well as the wild settlements with smaller habitations. Within a year, the camp became the fourth largest city in Jordan. This enormous population growth could lead to major conflicts.
Because of the tremendous population growth, that is, the flood of refugees streaming into the region, there can be shortages, for example, of water and wood, and this can lead to conflicts. So we use a time series analysis to evaluate archived images to determine whether shortages really are occurring, and if so, how we can respond to them.
Elisabeth Schöpfer is in close contact with on-site NGOs who act quickly to implement the recommendations she makes from her office in Germany. Eyes in the sky are facilitating an overview of the urgency on the ground. In Europe, it's those who live on riverbanks that could use this kind of analysis. Anyone who lives close to the water's edge is familiar with the deceptive quiet and how quickly catastrophe can strike. Extreme weather conditions are increasing in frequency, scientists say as a result of climate change. When rain soaks the countryside and the ground can no longer absorb the water, rivers begin rising into the surrounding landscape. An act of nature beyond control. Or can we calculate when the next high water mark will arrive? If a given region only flooded once in the past 100 years, the statistics look good, but nature is unpredictable. Once a flood has occurred, it's at least possible to determine the level of damage. At the Center for Satellite-Supported Crisis Information, Hendrik Svensner collects the data and uses them to evaluate the situation.
The real strength of long-distance surveillance is that it provides an overview, an actual view of the catastrophe, the scope of flooding, all visible on a single image. So it's primarily used in situation centers to help distribute resources, to know what's happening and where aid can best be deployed.
The satellite bounces signals off the Earth's surface and assesses what is reflected back. Because water reflects the signals differently than land, experts can recognize which regions are flooded and convert the information into maps. The maps represent the current situation, which areas are flooded and where help is needed. Satellite surveillance is a blessing for the people affected, but the data can't prevent the catastrophe from occurring. There is equipment that can determine which areas might be threatened by flooding in the future. A laser scanner. It measures the Earth's surface much more precisely than a satellite. When it flies over a potential floodplain, the device transmits signals and uses their reflections to determine the distance to all the objects they encounter on the ground. The result is a high-resolution digital model of the terrain and its structures. Koblenz, at the confluence of the Rhine and Moselle rivers, has experienced plenty of floods. At what level do the waters become threatening? After the flight, the surveying engineers turn the raw data into a model of the terrain. Then they can simulate various water levels and examine how floodwaters would rise. When two flooded rivers meet, the situation is particularly dangerous. The three-dimensional model relies on millions of measuring points. Precise simulations like this are used to help plan dikes and make residences flood-proof. But it's not just local residents who are interested in the data. Insurance companies allocate each residence located near the water to a particular risk category. The so-called Deutsches Eck in Koblenz exhibits all four risk levels. The homes in zones 1 and 2 are at low risk, but 3 and 4 are considered high risk. Only 1/4 of the homes in zone 4 are insured. If the insurance companies assess the risk as too high, the residents have no choice. They are aware of the danger, but there's not much they can do about it. The more precise the data we collect, the more we are influenced by the results.
We are wondering what is happening to the world. Everything is changing.
The very idea of human being some sort of natural concept is really going to change.
Our bodies will be so high-tech, we won't be able to really distinguish between what's natural and what's artificial.
Inside our own heads is the most complex arrangement of matter in the known universe.
You might ask yourself, can we get to be superhumans?
The original Industrial Revolution was driven by the discovery that you could use steam engines to do all kinds of interesting things.
But that was followed by additional revolutions for electricity and computers and communications technology. We're now in the early stages of the fourth industrial revolution, which is bringing together digital, physical, and biological systems.
One of the features of this fourth industrial revolution is that it doesn't change what we are doing, but it changes us.
With the ability to visualize brain activity, for example, through a simple consumer-based EEG device, it gives us access to ourselves in ways that we've never before thought possible. It unlocks the black box that is the brain and enables us to really, truly be able to realize an identity that is aspirational.
There's now a scientific foundation for the effects of mindfulness on the brain, on the genome, on biological aging. And when the human mind does know itself, then you get the potential for a new renaissance that restructures itself in terms of our relationship to life, our relationship to the planet, our relationship to work.
We need a different economic model. And by that, I don't mean capitalism versus communism. What I'm talking about is a shift in the system along the lines of the two big changes that happened in the 20th century, Keynesianism with a much greater focus on health and education and the role of government working with business, and then a reaction against that in late century to neoliberalism, where the focus was on free markets, freedom of the individual, and getting governments out of the way. We need a shift to a new system that will allow us to meet the basic needs of every human on the planet, that will live within planetary means, that will be fairer, and that will be focused as its key goal not on growth per se, but on maximizing human well-being. And history tells us that a values shift is triggered by creation of a new story about how we want to live.
I see the circular economy as something which fits very closely with mankind's goal to be innovative and creative and to always progress. We can use asset tracking, we can use IT, we can use 3D printing to enable this different economic model to recover materials, feed them back into the economy, and really to decouple growth from the resource constraints we have.
The reason we live in cities is not different today than it was 10,000 years ago. Even if we have got networks connecting us, we still want to have places where we meet in person. So this means the place where we work and the place where we live are much closer to each other, a city where we don't need to have big supply chains in order to produce things, where many things can be sourced locally thanks to 3D printing and robotics. So if we're able to do something to transform cities, to make them more efficient, then the impact can be huge.
Think about the prospect of getting rid of plastics. We must not only be inspired or informed by nature, but actually use natural organisms with which to design products and building parts. Only instead of varying material properties, we're varying biological functionality.
Design is critical today because it's the first signal of human intention. So the question of adding quality to quantity, it isn't a matter of simply circulating things that are potentially toxic. It's circulating things that are safe and healthy for all generations. So the goal is no longer, I want to be less bad, less monotonous, less unsafe, less unjust. It's really about a diverse, safe, healthy, and just world with clean air, clean water, clean soil, clean energy.
Together we are fighting to preserve our fragile climate from irreversible damage and devastation of unthinkable proportions.
If we think about the original Industrial Revolution, it was an energy revolution. I like to think of it as a kind of bookending of a period in human history during which we used fossil fuels, and it worked very well for us for a long time. But now we have to bring that to an end. We have energy technologies that can power our civilization: solar, wind, biomass. So then the question is, well, how do we get grid integration? Maybe the wind is blowing in Denmark, the sun is shining in Germany, and now you can move that electricity through an integrated grid. You can supply energy to everyone who needs it, and you can supply energy at all times.
Walking around, you do see different stuff as far as like the body marriage line. They use a lot of things that help them lift up and move things to the car. You just sit there and, program something, and it has its own set mind to go ahead and do everything. And then as humans, we just come in and take the extra step to help the technology.
It's not the cure-all for everything. There's definitely a lot of things where people perform the operation better, but certainly for the right applications, robotics are a huge improvement for the process.
The prediction of 5 million jobs lost by 2020 to technology is serious, but it's not the main question. Construction, manufacturing, services, public health and education, these industries will still exist. The main question is, what will be the future of work? How will we define work? How will we share the wealth?
From the viewpoint of the labor or jobs, now we really need new education or new training.
We're working with a World in Motion and First Robotics, trying to encourage students from 3rd grade all the way up through the end of high school. We had students make sailboats, and then we had them race them, and so they could see how quickly they could move. And they immediately went back and started to say, oh, I saw what happened, I'm going to go change this or that. And that was 3rd graders.
I just given a prize to a kid of 18 years old that has discovered something really very, very unique. Came up with how to get better productivity and better yields for seeds of corn. And so he basically came with the idea that if you would perforate these seeds, you would get more food. And you think about it and say, but he didn't go to university. So how does he get all that knowledge? And he told me, I mean, I've been watching YouTube since the age of 12, and I'm so interested that I've seen everything about it. I've read everything about it. The world is really open to learning. The thing is, how do you give the incentive to your kids to do that?
It's this ability of digital technology to change outcomes, to truly empower people all over the world that can create a more equitable growth, because I think the world needs that.
Fourth industrial revolution has the potential to make inequalities visible and to make them less acceptable in the future, and hopefully to gather and garner political support to take the necessary decision to reduce the gap.
Humans have always been using tools, but because of the recent advances in technology, we're beginning to have machines that can augment us in all sorts of interesting ways.
I was the first person in the world to be able to voluntarily move my legs whilst stepping in a robot by exciting the nervous system using electrical stimulators directly onto the spine. We believe that a cure will be possible if enough of the right people have the will to fast-track a cure for paralysis.
We take two things from the patient. First, we take a three-dimensional X-ray and we extract the three-dimensional data out of that so we can make a perfectly shaped puzzle piece. And then we also take a sample of fat tissue from the patient so that we can extract the stem cells out of those. And we use those stem cells with this three-dimensional scaffold that we fabricate, and after 3 weeks we have a piece of living bone that's ready for implantation.
Being able to use genome editing to understand the genetic changes that lead to cancer, and technologies like drug delivery, getting molecules into particular types of cells. There's a lot of excitement about being able to move much more quickly on this disease.
One of the things that I think is so essential to free and open societies is freedom of thought. And up until now, the conversation we've been having is around freedom of speech. Once we can access people's thoughts and access people's emotion, we have to create a space that enables people to think freely, to think divergent thoughts, to think creative thoughts. And in a society where people fear having those thoughts, the likelihood of being able to enjoy progress is significantly diminished.
We need to take responsibility at every level of society, from the individual and the personal to the institutional to the global, to adapt to these technological challenges and changes which are redefining what it means to be human, what it means to work, what it means to be completely embedded in this world.
People always ask me if I'm an optimist or a pessimist. The technology exists, but how do we get it and implement it at the scale we need at a price that people around the world can afford?
Even though we have everyday problems we have to solve, we have to find a way to lay the foundations for the innovations of tomorrow.
How do we understand our place in the universe? How do we try to answer the big questions in life? Who are we? What are we made of? Where do we come from? With the advent of digital age of computing, we were suddenly able to answer questions never before solved. Exploring the relationship between the imagination of the scientists and the frontier of computing, and the ever closer reality of the universal quantum computer, this film examines the hazy boundary between imagination and reality.
So what I want to build is a large-scale quantum computer, a device which can solve certain problems so much faster, tremendously much faster. So what means much faster here? Much faster means that even the fastest classical computer may take 1 million years for a problem a quantum computer can solve in a few milliseconds. So that means we can solve problems which we never even thought of that would be solvable. You know, we may find new drugs, we may understand processes in biology, we may understand life itself. I grew up in Germany in a place called Ulm, close to Munich and Stuttgart. My mom would always say I'm asking a hole in her stomach because I kept on asking questions about everything. My father would take me to the planetarium and we would watch the shows, and I would go out in the evening with my telescope and try to learn about the planets and about nebulas and space in general. I watched Star Trek in primary school and then I wanted to be science officer on the Enterprise. And then I did some research and tried to figure out what do I need to study to become science officer on the Enterprise. I realized that actually being on a spaceship is not so great, but understanding nature is actually pretty awesome. So and understanding how things work, the mysteries of quantum physics, in fact the mysteries of subatomic particles, of how the world works. What I really wanted to do is building something which can teleport somebody from A to B, building some kind of shield for a starship, building a starship engine or things like that. All these kind of things fascinated me. And so this is maybe the starting time of my scientific career, really. One of the things which is very strange is that you could be at two different places at the same time. So that doesn't mean there's two of you, it means you are at two different places at the same time. And so we actually make use of that, not with people but with individual atoms. And so we have them at two places at the same time. There's another very strange thing which is entanglement. And basically what that means is if you have two entangled particles, and you separate these two particles and put them on one end each of the universe. If you do something to one of these particles, then something will happen to the other particle, even though they don't communicate. And that's just very strange. It really is completely mind-boggling. And we actually trying to utilize such quantum effects to build a quantum computer. For a normal traditional computer, you write certain things into the memory, and then, for example, a number, and that number then goes through the processor, is computed, maybe multiplied with another number, and the output happens. Now imagine you could write all the numbers in the world simultaneously into your memory and compute simultaneously all the calculations you want to do and get all the results out at the same time. This is kind of how a quantum computer works. So what do you see here? This actually is a very rudimentary, extremely small quantum computer. So your classical computer operates basically with a memory, a hard drive, and on that hard drive you save information, and that information is saved in bits. And so the more information you want to save, the more bits you require. And so the same in a quantum computer, you want more and more bits, the more complicated the problems you want to solve, the more bits you need. But now you're not using bits, you use quantum bits. And quantum bits are encoded in each ion. So one ion is one quantum bit. And so inside a quantum computer you have then tens, hundreds, thousands, even millions of individual atoms. And each atom is exactly